Hi everyone, thanks for being here. It's early morning. Hope the coffee is working. Um, Dilip Rajan, I lead the solution architecture team for the AWS and SaaS relationship and partnership. A rabbit hole. Ugh. Well, I'm always figuring out how to communicate with my team via email or Slack in the most effective way. And my thinking is faster than how I can type. So I end up making lots of mistakes. And I love the fact that we have all these tools that can automate emails for me. So all I do today is just look at all my content, write an email, and just draft a couple of prompts, and I have my email ready. So my boss doesn't yell at me for making grammatical mistakes.
Hi, I'm John Blackwell, and I'm the director of the strategic analytics team at the Nature Conservancy. So I was talking to one of my colleagues yesterday who somebody came up to me and was very surprised that TNC invests in analytics. So I think we'll get into why that is during the presentation. But yeah, in terms of a rabbit hole for me, I just went to visit my mom in England, and I'm really bad when she says like what temperature it is outside, and have to convert it into Fahrenheit so I know. But then that got me thinking about like all of the different sort of systems of measure that I didn't really understand where it came from. So anyway, now I know why there are 60 minutes in an hour, and I also know how many gallons there are in a hogshead.
That's fun. Well, I'm Karen Blaskowitz. I am the Associate Director of Marketing Automation at the Nature Conservancy. So I lead a team of developers that build our CI 360 campaigns that send out of SaaS. And so a rabbit hole that I recently went down was, I don't know if anybody's seen the Reese Witherspoon reel about women in AI, and I was shocked when I started talking with professional colleagues and friends about women's use of AI, because we're using it personally, but not professionally, and so trying to create those like safe spaces to test it out for women to use it in their daily lives.
Awesome. So the starting point where we're going to start this conversation, so many of you probably don't know this, but TNC was actually one of the first to move from marketing automation, an old SaaS product, to CI 360. So John, this one's for you. Could you share a little bit about what that transition was like, maybe where you started, how it evolved, and what having a strong analytics foundation, how that helped throughout the process?
Yeah, so I mean, TNC has been a SaaS customer for a long time, and using SaaS to develop our analytics. And so when I took this job, I guess about 7 years ago, at this point, the sophistication of our analytics was increasing, but we were really hitting a wall in just terms of like execution limits. So, we had a fairly complicated system to sort of execute on direct marketing campaigns. So there was one system for email, one system for direct mail. There'd be a different process for telemarketing and all of the various channels. And so it was just, it was very cumbersome to deal with. And at a time when the landscape was becoming more complex, like working with multiple vendors and multiple systems really kind of forced a simplicity that just really wasn't working for us. And so, yeah, I mean, moving to CI 360, we were able to do everything in-house, end-to-end, and that just, that initial payoff for us was really that we no longer had the limitations that were sort of forced by the complexity that we used to deal with.
Yeah, that's great. And so maybe, Karen, we could stay on the same topic for a minute. And from a marketing automation perspective, could you talk about some of the biggest challenges in orchestrating these consistent, personalized engagements across different channels? Maybe talk about SMS and then how other systems play into that mix as well.
Yeah, so we segment all of our campaigns out of CI 360. And we recently launched SMS, and for our larger tentpole campaigns, we tried to connect directly from CI 360 into our vendor. And we found that the throughput in SaaS was too fast for what our SMS vendor could receive. So we had to go out into the marketplace, and we actually use AWS as a staging environment. So we segment our files out of SaaS, and they go to AWS, and they're throttled into smaller batches. So that way we can really make sure that we reach everyone for those sends.
Awesome. So if we go to Dilip now and take a step back, when organizations like the Nature Conservancy look to, to think about AI and operationalizing this in the future, could you tell us a little bit about why having the cloud foundation with someone like AWS is critical, and especially as we think about scalability,
Yeah.
security, governance?
No, that's a really important topic for us to talk about. But just to set some context, the CI360 platform runs on AWS. It's completely powered through the cloud. And we have lots of value propositions, product, operations, scalability, security, like three things which is non-negotiable as far as the ability of CI360 to run on AWS is first is scale. And I can give an example about scale. For example, if you want to go from one model to 10 models, you don't have to really spin up a lot of compute for that. But even if you do spin up compute, that is something that we can manage very well within AWS. Second one, non-negotiable security. Data stays within your virtual private cloud. Data is encrypted. You have the necessary compliance and controls within the framework of what CI360 runs on AWS. And then finally, governance and global reach. So when we talk about governance, I want to point that governance is a matter of perspective. But when it comes to a mission-driven organization like TNC and for SaaS, it's a non-negotiable that you must not have governance as an afterthought, but bake it into the product and the foundation from the very beginning. So these are some of the features that sort of provided the ability for CI360 to be successful with TNC and making sure that AWS is providing the best in breed features and capabilities for CI360 to run successfully.
Yeah, that's great. And so next, we're almost 10 minutes in, and we haven't said the word AI yet, so I want to get into that for a little bit. I know it's a hot topic right now. But obviously, AI is like a big umbrella, so a lot of people think about generative AI, but we also think about analytics and more traditional approaches. And so, John, could you maybe give us an overview of how TNC uses analytics today for segmentation, personalization, and orchestrating journeys across channels, things like that?
Yeah, so, I talked about moving to CI360 and that how it enabled us to really sort of deploy analytics and be more nimble. I mean, I think one of the big areas of success for us, which has been a real growth driver, is just our analytics around attribution. So, through design of experiments, through creating models, one of the first things that we learned was that we were spending far too much on digital ads, and so we were able to dramatically cut down on that investment without any negative impact to revenue. And then just beyond that, in terms of attribution, just getting a better understanding of what it is that's prompting people to give. So I should say, as an organization, I mean, we're funded almost entirely from private donations, so just from people giving us money. And we have several different sources of fundraising revenue. The membership department next year will raise about $150 million. One of the things, we do rely on direct mail as a thing, but one of the things that, we had been noticing is that, there's a lot of people who receive direct mail but are also receiving email from us, but they only ever give to us online. And, initially, our approach to that would have been okay, these people don't need direct mail to give. But what we were able to find is that so many of the people who are now giving to us online are actually triggered to make that donation through receiving the direct mail piece. And so that allowed us to sort of modify the journey for that subset of our donors and really completely redesign the direct mail package. So it's no longer about here's the envelope that you put your check in, but it's here are the ways that you can give to us online. The other analytics work that we've been doing, which is starting to yield real benefits, is our work around ask optimization. So again, we have to decide for our million-plus members, when we reach out to them, how much are we actually going to ask you for? So if you ask somebody for too little, you're leaving money on the table. But obviously, just asking everybody for a big gift is going to suppress response. And so now what we're rolling out with is a much more fine-tuned and sort of personalized ask strategy, which is then baked into the journeys, which I think Karen's going to talk about later.
Awesome, that's great. And so, Dilip, kind of in a similar vein, we know that generative AI is a very hot topic right now. We've been talking about agents, all of Innovate, things like that. Could you talk to us a little bit about how AWS can help marketers and organizations like TNC?
Well, I'm just kind of rewinding back to October 2022. ChatGPT got launched. It's a different world. Most of us hadn't even been going to an office. So when they announced ChatGPT, my boss was like, "Oh, so what do we have in response?" And we were looking at each other like, "What are you talking about? What's an LLM?" And initially, the whole premise of having a model was like you should have the access to the model, you should be able to train the model. But really, eventually, the team and the organization started pivoting towards how do we make this easy? How do we make sure models are available without us having a point of view? Let the customer choose. Let our partners choose. And that's when the company launched a service called Bedrock. It's API-driven, hosts third-party models primarily. In fact, Meta, Llama, Anthropic's models now OpenAI is going to be available soon on Bedrock. So all these models are available, but fundamentally, when the service was designed within the security perimeter of what the customer's data provides. The data is not used to train any of the models. The isolation exists within the model landscape itself. And really what we want to do is to provide the best tool for the customer to use that for their best use case. In TNC's case, it's not just about journey optimization, but also about compressing time and creating value. At the end of the day, an LLM is a predictive model that generates text on the basis of context. It's straightforward, it's simple. But behind the scenes, you must have the right security guardrails, and one must be able to trust the model sensitivity filters, PII protections, and all of the other goodness that comes along with these services. So that's where AWS has spent a lot of time and effort in ensuring that we are able to provide the best tools, particularly from a governance and security and a guardrails perspective, that provide the scale for a customer like TNC to be able to not just create journeys, but compress time in terms of automation, and then eventually provide augmentation towards the capabilities in enhancing donor outreach or campaign or any of the other capabilities that are required for being successful with GenAI, instead of thinking of that from like after the fact of implementation. So that's really like the real value proposition of providing all these use cases in a one-size-fits-all situation.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's worth mentioning that CI360 has been using Bedrock for years now, so all of our generative AI capabilities run on Bedrock. It's been really awesome to use that platform, watch it mature over time. So John, maybe you could give us a couple examples of where you're seeing generative AI being used at TNC?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, maybe I can talk about this in two parts, sort of like what we're doing now, where we've seen the value, and then also kind of what we're looking to do in the future. So, I mean, right now, in terms of sort of the value for AI, I mean, it's been huge for us, and it's been very clear too. But it's really that we're able to do so much more, a little bit better, and just much quicker. So it's just in terms of, like, it's sort of in practical terms, I feel like, what a single data scientist can do today, it would have taken a team of data scientists to do, like, not all that long ago. And so, like, when we're talking about developing new models, I mean, we're obviously using AI for code generation, for feature selection, for performance tuning within the model, for deployment, all of those things. So more models quicker, and we're able to get those into production much quicker. And I think sometimes maybe people can sort of like lose sight of the compound effect that has, even though a lot of these different projects that we might be working on might only have sort of an incremental lift in revenue. Like together, it's really been huge for us. And I mean, there's numbers to kind of back up what I'm saying here. I talked about over the last 7 years since we've been on this journey, we've doubled the amount of revenue that the organization is bringing in. And this comes at a time where in the industry that's just not happening. We had peer organizations that were raising more than us 5 or 6 years ago, but like literally when we're looking at this next year, we'll probably raise double what they're raising, and right now there are just nobody else is raising as much money as we are, so that's really exciting. In terms of where it's going, I've been talking about the sort of the membership fundraising that I've been focused on the membership fundraising. That's mostly, the mass marketing efforts that are going after smaller donors. But recently, the scope of my team has changed, and we're going to be supporting the organization as a whole. I had mentioned that, in the membership department, we raise about $150 million. The organization as a whole raises over $1 billion. And a lot of that money comes from just a very, very small handful of donors who make very large gifts. Now, a lot of those people who make very big, $1 million plus gifts to the organization do actually start out as just a regular membership donor that might have come on through like a direct mail piece and started giving us $100 a year. And so our ability to identify who those people are in that general membership population who have the potential to really make a very large gift, like if we can do that just a little bit better, that will literally could translate into hundreds of millions of dollars for the organization. So one of the things that we're talking to SAS with right now and we're looking at right now is really sort of making use of synthetic data. And I know this was talked about in the opening session, about improving your ability to predict rare events, and obviously sort of that major donor prospect identification is a super rare event. And so, that's one of the things that we're most excited about and where we really feel like there could be a big payoff in the future.
Awesome, yeah. I love how you plugged synthetic data because at SAS for years now, we always talk about generative AI not just as language models or image generation, but we think synthetic data is very important as well, digital twins, things like that. So great call out. Karen, maybe next we could talk a little bit about real-time journeys, how you all are using them, the speed, efficiency, revenue impact that those have for you all.
Yeah, so I talked a little bit about SMS earlier. So we've got large tentpole campaigns that we send out, but we also send out real-time journeys. And so we needed to set up a welcome series for joining TNC through SMS. There's a lot of legal requirements, but we also wanted to meet people where they are. And so we set up a webhook on our website. Somebody goes online that says, I want to sign up for SMS. And so that webhook then triggers an event in SAS that then sends the SMS to the person immediately. Thank you for signing up. And so this really meets them where they are, builds that brand affinity, and that personalization, right? Like you couldn't get that previously. You'd have to do a bulk send, and it could take time, and that moment is lost. So we've really been enabled by that.
Yeah, that's great. Next, I want to talk a little bit about governance and trust and responsible AI. That's something that we think about a lot in marketing. We always say brands are your biggest asset. So when we're adopting AI, you want to be really careful about where you're applying it or how you're applying it because you don't want to erode that brand's trust. So Dilip, maybe we could start with you and you could share some best practices for implementing AI responsibly.
Yeah, just one quick story about early adoption of Bedrock with CI360. So very early on, one of the teams that we were speaking to with CI360 was like, hey, Dilip, all these responses are great. I just don't know what's good or what's bad or how can it be better. And that feedback was so important for us from CI360 that it eventually became a feature called as Bedrock Evaluation. So it goes back to the same concept of responsible AI. But really, the tenet here is responsible AI and experimentation shouldn't be in tension with each other. They can go fast together, but at the same time, you must have the right unified data platform and governance baked in, so that whenever you want to experiment fast, it's not a question of whether you want to do responsible AI. It's already baked into the basic tenet of how you're building your application. So really, that's how you should think about responsible AI and experimenting fast. But at the same time, it's also about the features that you want to put in your product, right? If you are wanting to do a campaign outreach, generating content is something that you want to do in a way where humans are involved in that decision-making process. You don't want AI deciding for you. You want AI recommending, but humans should be in the loop, should be aware of what the responses are. And humans being in the loop is not a constraint of the system. It is in fact a quality assurance measure. That's how the systems are supposed to be built. So I would say that the governance and responsible AI must have humans in the loop. And probably if you wanted to send an email at 2 a.m. at night to all the donors, that's fine. You can automate that away through AI. But if you really want to do data sharing across donors, or if you want to create a campaign strategy, that's something that must have human in the loop. So humans must be provided with tools to evaluate whether the campaigns are going to be successful, whether the journeys are going to be successful, but also the quality of the responses that come out. So things like evaluation is supposed to be baked into the product, and having the guardrails set up in such a way that you're not predicting the next president's election is something that shouldn't be a part of the conversation that you must be having with the AI. So that's really my 2 cents in terms of like ensuring that responsible AI and experimentation are not at tension with each other, but at the same time making sure that we provide the right tools and have the right tenants for all of the AI work that you want to do through campaign outreaches.
Yeah, that's great. So John, maybe bringing this to TNC for a minute. You guys are very mission-driven, nonprofit. Donors put a lot of trust in you when they donate. So when you think about responsible marketing, trustworthy AI, all of these topics, how does governance factor into TNC's approach?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of alluded to this in the question, but like it's critical for us because people always have, even people who care, say, passionately about the environment, they always have a choice in terms of who they donate to. So if we lose that trust, we just lose that donor, and probably not going to get them back. So yeah, I mean, for us, we are very careful when it comes to data stewardship and privacy. But I think, and certainly echo everything that Dilip had said. But I think the other part of it is just also keeping an eye just to make sure that there are not like unintended effects from deploying the AI. Meaning, so something might look fairly innocuous, but like there could be unintended consequences in terms of like potentially who it's predicting that you reach out to. So I mean that's always something that we take a look at. And also just being careful about what data points are used. Like if once an analyst is in the loop, it can look to see, oh, ethnicity is being used here, where that's really not appropriate. So yeah, again, it's super important to us. And I don't always understand all that goes into our legal and security team sort of like reviewing what products we're allowed to use. They do seem very strict, but I will say that it does seem like SAS's approach to AI sort of, let me put it this way. It feels like when we can get approval for SaaS AI products in a way that it doesn't seem possible for others just because they trust SaaS's approach to AI.
Yeah, I'll take that as a really good sign. When we think about AI, we spend a lot of time thinking about the types of organizations that use our software. And there's like just a level of transparency, guardrails, human in the loop that's required for organizations like TNC. So it's a big factor in how we approach developing generative AI, analytical capabilities, things like that. So we're going to transition to kind of a lessons learned, advice type of section. I want to give a quick heads up for the audience. In a couple of minutes, we do have some time for open Q&A, so if you have any questions, start thinking about those. Otherwise, I'm going to keep grilling this panel. So maybe we could talk next. Each of you could just share one piece of advice for organizations starting on their own intelligent engagement journey or AI journey, whatever.
Yeah, a lot of the customers that we interact with AWS with, they sometimes go down the let me figure out the AI use case and then I'll figure out what the outcome is supposed to be. Like classic problem, right? Have your technology and try to fit a problem into that technology. That sort of doesn't really. It creates frustration down the road for a lot of our customers. So the tenet that we follow and we guide our customers for is let's have a clear outcome, whether it is a return of investment, a return of employee, whether it's return of automation or return of augmentation. Let's be clear about those kind of outcomes. And let's also have the unified data experience that powers TNC, particularly donors. What they really care about is it's a cause for the heart. So when you are associating yourself with an organization, particularly from a giving perspective, one must be very clear about what that mission stands for. And as long as that sort of mission-driven approach is taken for organizations like TNC, and then we follow the same principles, outcomes can be well aligned. So for trust is super important, and I would just say that having having clear outcomes and having a clear trust mechanism for yourself to interact with the technology is super important for these outcomes to be tangible for yourself at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think for me, it goes back to some of the answers I gave before, and just in terms of starting small, starting with something that's achievable. I think we do see a lot of cool things with AI, and even at this conference, I'm kind of blown away by some of the huge projects. But I just feel like there's so much gain to be had. Just in the example I gave, just building more models that are slightly better and deploying them quicker. Again, there's a compounding effect there, and I think that's an opportunity sometimes that people can overlook, chasing the big thing when there's a lot of small things that can be done quickly and implemented quickly that can really make a big difference.
Yeah, so I think my piece of advice would be to think about, as you're integrating all your different MarTech systems, it's not enough to just think about how your data is transferring from one system to another in terms of fields, but you also have to think about requirements of how the data is being transferred. Are you using APIs, or using file outputs? What are those requirements there? And really making sure that all of the systems are talking to each other and that the data is coming back appropriately to then feed into the models and things like that.
Yeah, it's great. So we do have a couple minutes now, just checking the time, but I wanted to see if there were any questions for the panel from the audience. You can ask them anything right now. Thank you.
So my question is for Karen. Do y'all do any types of configuring the times and days in which you reach out to your customers within 360? And if you do, how did you find that configuration to set up?
Can you repeat the first part of it?
So do you do any specialization or personalization of the day and time in which you contact your customers? So say, for example, John wants to be contacted on Tuesday at 5 p.m., so we make sure that we send out the emails to John at Tuesday at 5 p.m.
Have
Y'all
we're
made
not
it to that level yet?
Yeah, we're not to that level yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
My question is also for Karen. So I'm just curious, because you mentioned that many women using AI are using it in their personal lives. And I'm just curious, do you have a group that meets weekly, monthly, and you get together and talk about use cases, about how to use it in your professional lives?
Yeah, so I mentor women MBA candidates, and so we meet monthly to talk about what are the latest trends, what are they seeing, and so that's a safe space to kind of have those explorations. And I typically try to invite one of my female colleagues every month to talk about how they're using it so that they can see real examples.
This is for Karen, too. You talked a lot about journey orchestration and how it saved you a lot of time, basic overhead, to be able to leverage multiple tactics within the journey. It simplified the approach. Can you elaborate that on some? I know you mentioned there's direct mail, text message, email. Is there a tool that SAS has that can do the actual email blast or text message, or are there subsequent vendors on the other end that actually executes the piece?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we do use CI360 for our email, but in terms of telemarketing, SMS, and direct mail, we send those files out to different vendors, different platforms, our ads programs as well. We have used the connector for Facebook and Google to send over files that way as well. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Hi, also for Karen. Can you talk a little bit about the creative and how you load your creative into CI360 for your emails and what that process looks like and whether you've added any automation to that?
Yes. So I I do not work with the team that loads it in. They have a template that we use for email. We have a creative team that builds out the assets and sends them over to our production team. But I do know recently from working with the production team that they are using some forms of our Copilot to be able to generate and troubleshoot code. So because we have a template, and then, right, there's something that'll render in a test that doesn't look exactly right. And so they have some prompts that they utilize to help troubleshoot that.
This is for Karen as well. When you talk about orchestration, can you share any challenges that you've seen working across all the multi-channels from digital, text, email?
Yeah. So challenges that we've had working across multiple channels. I mean, I feel like attribution initially was tough, but then, like, as John's team has built out models and iterate and really having those conversations of like, what should we be doing? How should we be iterating on this audience? We have a QA function that's been looking at counts for us, which has been really great, because then if there's something that we're seeing size-wise in our audience files that doesn't look exactly right, we can go back and kind of have those conversations with analytics. Okay, this is what we thought we were going to see. This is what we actually are seeing. Where are some of those disconnects? So.
Hi, I could have many more questions for Karen, but I'll ask this one to John. You talked before about the compounding effects of all these smaller marketing efforts that make a really big difference. I was surprised to kind of hear just how successful the TNC is in terms of your $150 million membership program and over $1 billion. Has that progress been kind of steadily growing, or is there something that kind of moved you into that billion plus figure?
Yeah. So, and I think there's two numbers there. Like the membership program, like a few years ago, was about $68 million, and that's grown to $150 million. No, the growth that we have seen. Like the strong growth, I guess, started about 7 years ago, which I mean, obviously there's a lot of things that went into it, but it kind of also coincides with the time when there was really more of an investment in analytics. Like before that period, you know, sometimes membership revenue would be down, sometimes it'd be up by a couple %. You know, it had been kind of, you know, modest growth, I would say, before then, but this kind of big, like year after year, double-digit growth is really coinciding with the time when there was really a, you know, a much bigger investment in analytics.
In terms of implementing all this, when you started getting 360 in place, and this is for all of you, what was your biggest surprise and your biggest frustration in doing that?
I mean, I think the biggest frustration, I guess, is that, like, you know, once you choose the platform, you expect everything to kind of fall into place immediately. But yeah, I mean, sort of building out the underlying databases that support CI360 did take a lot more effort. I mean, I probably should have expected it, but it took a lot more effort than expected to create all of the, you know, the data mart environments underneath that could really support what we wanted to do in terms of the journey creation. You know, that was pretty time consuming. I mean, in terms of the biggest surprise, I mean, I guess I don't know that it was a surprise. It just, you know, the good thing was that just not having to rely on just so many various systems and external partners really just made my life so much easier.
I can actually feed into that. Yeah, so one of the biggest surprises that we had was we had third parties that were segmenting some of our data. We had in-house that was segmenting some of our data. And so as we brought it all in, there were a lot of surprises around, like, oh, that's not actually what we wanted to have happen with, like, the audiences. These are not the right people that we've been contacting, or we wanted some more of these people. And so like having to get used to some of those audience shifts and being able to have more control on testing was really both surprising and really great for the organization.
So, question for John. Based on what you were describing around identifying an overinvestment in your digital, I was hoping you could just share a little bit about how maybe multi-channel experimentation played into that discovery.
Yeah. So, in terms of our digital ads, there were a few things, and please feel free to chat with me after if you want to go into a lot more detail on this. But we did a couple of approaches. One, we just turned off ads at one point, like over the summer when things aren't particularly busy anyway for us. Saw no impact, and then we also looked at working with contacting people, working with partners who could target specific groups of people. So in the test group they would be served our ad, and in the other group they would just be served some kind of PSA, had nothing to do with TNC, just to make sure that they could reach them so that we could do sort of a true apples to apples comparison. And again, that provided absolutely no lift, and we did both of those things a couple of different times, and really saw almost no impact from the ads that we were doing. So yeah.
All right, well, thank you all for asking some questions, getting some audience engagement. That was great. We do have a minute, so Dilip, I'm going to ask you one more question, if you don't mind. But as you think about AI trends, agents, all of that, and also all the work that's coming out of AWS, what do you think this audience, marketers in general, should be most excited about right now?
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about agents and how they can automate a lot of the thinking behind multiple marketing activities that you may be doing. So I think that the trend of focusing more towards agents, particularly the notion that you don't have one agent that solves sort of one set of your problem statement, but you have multiple agents that are working hand in hand with some sort of a supervisor agent. That's really compelling, and how you can scale to not just a few hundreds of agents, but thousands of agents, and trying to think about designing a system, whether for marketing purposes or for journey creation, in such a way that you can not just use one benefit from one model, but you can use an abstraction of multiple models. You can use multiple data sets, one data model or a different data model. That experience of having these agents is what we are seeing a lot of marketers use in the modern time. So, to be honest with you, it's a fun time. There's a lot of new technologies coming out, so we hear new things every day. I can't keep up, but I think it's really an interesting time today to be sort of in the forefront of agentic AI and Bedrock and AWS altogether.
Thanks for passing the mic. All right, so as we wrap up here, I'm actually going to pull up, we have some contact information if you want to reach out, have follow-up conversations with any of us. In a second, I'll flip to another slide where we have some QR codes and some cool articles, web pages about the work that the three of us do together. I just wanted to say thank you all for joining this panel. I was really excited for this as we were planning for it because we got to hear about engagement, journeys, AI from really three different levels. So at the customer level, how you're using CI360, obviously we're in the middle, and then the cloud below AWS. So I thought this was a really fun session. Special shout out to Karen for answering all of those crowd questions. But just want to thank everyone for coming out today and being so engaged. With that, thank you all.